You know the names. Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy. Their faces are practically true crime royalty, their stories told and retold. But what if I told you some of the most prolific and terrifying serial killers in history are names you've probably never heard? What if the killers who racked up the highest body counts have slipped through the cracks of infamy? These are the murderers who hid in plain sight, whose horrifying reigns of terror were largely forgotten, overshadowed by a handful of household names. They operated in the shadows, hunted the vulnerable, and their true stories are more shocking than you can imagine. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the monsters that mainstream history skipped over. We're counting down the 10 deadliest serial killers you never learned about. Number 10, the Freeway Phantom. Kicking off our list at number 10 is a ghost who haunted the capital of the United States, a predator known only as the Freeway Phantom. Between April 1971 and September 1972, a wave of fear gripped Washington, D.C. as 6 young black girls, ages 10 to 18, were abducted and murdered. His victims were Carol Spinks, Darlenia Johnson, Brenda Crockett, Nenemoshia Yates, Brenda Woodard, and Diane Williams. Each girl was taken, held for days, sexually assaulted, and then strangled. Their bodies were left discarded along major DC freeways, a grim public display of the killer's absolute contempt. The Phantom's cruelty was matched only by his arrogance. After abducting his 5th victim, 10-year-old Brenda Woodard, the killer himself called her family. A terrified and confused Brenda was forced to speak to them one last time. Then he left a note in the pocket of his final victim, 17-year-old Diane Williams, taunting the police directly. "This is taunt you! Catch me if you can!" It was a chilling message from a killer who seemed to revel in the terror he created. Despite a massive investigation, the Freeway Phantom was never identified. The case went cold, leaving a city scarred and 6 families without justice. The killer who terrorized a community simply vanished, becoming a phantom in every sense of the word. Number 9. Bible John. Our 9th entry takes us across the Atlantic to Glasgow, Scotland, in the late 1960s, and to a series of crimes that would become the stuff of dark legend. He was called Bible John, an unidentified killer who targeted women at the city's popular Barrowland Ballroom. Over just 18 months, from 1968 to 1969, he is believed to have murdered at least 3 women: Patricia Docker, Jemima MacDonald, and Helen Puttock. His method was consistent and brutal. He'd meet his victims at the dance hall, charm his way into their company, and then strangle them with their own stockings. All 3 women were young mothers, and all were menstruating at the time of their deaths, a detail that led some investigators to believe it was a key part of his twisted ritual. The nickname came from the killer's final known encounter. The sister of his last victim, Helen Puttock, actually shared a taxi with Helen and the man who would murder her. She told police he was well-dressed, had overlapping front teeth, and quoted from the Bible, condemning adultery. This sole eyewitness account created a near mythical figure in Scottish criminal history. Despite one of the largest manhunts Scotland had ever seen, Bible John was never caught. In the decades since, various suspects have been named and DNA has been tested, but nothing has ever been conclusive. The identity of the eloquent, scripture-quoting killer remains one of Scotland's most haunting mysteries. Number 8. The West Mesa Murders. At number 8, we travel to the arid outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico, for a case that unearthed a modern-day graveyard. In February 2009, a woman walking her dog stumbled upon a human bone sticking out of the desert soil. When authorities began to excavate, they uncovered the true horror of what the West Mesa was hiding: a mass grave. Over the next year, investigators uncovered the skeletal remains of 11 women and an unborn child, all buried in shallow graves. The victims, who vanished between 2001 and 2005, were mostly young Hispanic women, many of whom had struggled with drug addiction and were involved in sex work. They were among the most vulnerable members of society, and their disappearances had largely gone unnoticed until they were all found together in this desolate patch of land. The media dubbed the unknown killer the West Mesa Bone Collector, but the case is officially known as the West Mesa Homicides. The investigation has been incredibly difficult. With only skeletal remains, the causes of death were nearly impossible to determine. One man, Lorenzo Montoya, who lived near the burial site and was killed in 2006, has been considered a suspect, especially since the disappearances seem to stop after his death. However, with no definitive evidence linking anyone to the crimes, the case remains officially unsolved as of early 2026. The families of victims like Veronica Romero and Michelle Valdez are left without answers, and a chilling question hangs over Albuquerque. Who was responsible for this boneyard? Number 7. H.H. Holmes. For number 7, we journey back to the 19th century to meet a man often sensationalized as America's first serial killer, Dr. H.H. Holmes. The legend of Holmes is that of a criminal mastermind who built a murder castle in Chicago for the 1893 World's Fair. A hotel engineered for death, complete with trapdoors, gas chambers, and a basement crematorium where he supposedly murdered up to 200 tourists. But this is a classic case where the truth is just as disturbing as the myth, though for different reasons. That murder castle was never a hotel for the fair, and there's no evidence he killed tourists there. The building's bizarre construction was less about creating a death trap and more about furthering Holmes's numerous insurance and investment scams. The stories of torture chambers were largely inventions of the era's sensationalist press. So why is he on this list? Because the real H.H. Holmes was a prolific con artist and a cold, calculating killer whose true victim count is unknowable. While he confessed to 27 murders, many of whom were later found to be alive, researchers can definitively confirm he was responsible for around 9 murders. His victims weren't random tourists, they were his business associates, lovers, and their children, all killed for financial gain. He was a master manipulator, not the architect of a horror hotel. He killed people not in some fantasy dungeon, but in plain sight through poison, suffocation, and chilling indifference. He's a monster whose evil was amplified by myth, but whose real crimes were terrifyingly personal and greedy. And no 6. The Cleveland Torso Murderer. At number 6 is another phantom, a killer so brutal he was nicknamed the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Active in Cleveland, Ohio during the Great Depression between 1935 and 1938, the Cleveland Torso Murderer was responsible for the deaths of at least 12 victims, though some believe the true number is closer to 20. This killer's signature was sickeningly unique. The victims were often transients from the city's impoverished shantytowns known as Hoovervilles. They were systematically dismembered, with their torsos often being the only part left for police to find. In many cases, the heads were never recovered, making identification almost impossible. This wasn't just murder, it was butchery. The precision of the dismemberment suggested the killer had significant anatomical or surgical knowledge. The case became a personal obsession for Cleveland's safety director, the famous lawman Eliot Ness, fresh off his victory against Al Capone. But Ness and the Cleveland police were completely stumped and publicly humiliated by the killer's ability to operate without leaving a single clue. A primary suspect, a doctor named Francis Sweeney, was interrogated but never charged. After Sweeney voluntarily committed himself to a mental institution, the killings stopped, but no one was ever convicted. To this day, the Mad Butcher has never been identified, leaving one of the grisliest crime sprees in American history unsolved. We're halfway through our list, and believe it or not, the stories only get more disturbing from here. If you find these deep dives into forgotten history compelling, take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming up. Number 5, the Long Island serial killer. Now for number 5, we have a case that proves some of the most terrifying mysteries are the ones still unfolding. For years, he was known only as the Long Island serial killer, or LISK, connected to a string of human remains discovered along the desolate stretches of Ocean Parkway in New York. Since 2010, the remains of at least 10 to 17 victims, mostly women involved in sex work, have been found. For over a decade, the case was a chilling, unsolved mystery. The killer seemed to be a ghost, using burner phones and the anonymity of the internet to lure his victims before leaving their remains scattered in the thick brush along the beach. Then, in July 2023, a stunning breakthrough. An architect named Rex Heuermann was arrested. As of early 2026, he has been charged in connection with 7 of the murders and is awaiting trial. Hoyerman has pleaded not guilty to all charges, but the story is far from over. The complexity of the case has led to speculation that more than one predator may have used the area as a dumping ground. While Hoyerman's arrest has provided some long-awaited answers, the full, horrifying scope of the Long Island murders is still coming into focus, proving that monsters can hide in our suburbs for decades. Number 4, Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. Number 4 is a name you might recognize, but the sheer scale of his horror is something that's rarely fully comprehended. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, is one of history's most prolific serial murderers, yet he's often overshadowed by more charismatic killers in the true crime world. For nearly 2 decades, from the early 1980s until his arrest in 2001, Ridgway terrorized Washington state. He almost exclusively targeted sex workers and vulnerable young runaways, women he believed no one would miss. This brutal calculation allowed him to kill with impunity for years. He would strangle his victims and dump their bodies in clustered sites around the Green River. He confessed to so many murders that he admitted he had trouble keeping them all straight. Ridgway was ultimately convicted of 49 murders, but he claimed to have killed more than 70, and investigators believed the number could be over 90. He agreed to cooperate with authorities to locate his victims' remains in exchange for being spared the death penalty. His confession was a flat, emotionless catalogue of death. Gary Ridgway wasn't a criminal mastermind, he was a relentless predator whose staggering body count is a terrifying reminder of how a killer can operate for decades just by preying on the forgotten. Number 3, Harold Shipman, Dr. Death. Our third deadliest killer is perhaps the most chilling of all because he was someone his victims trusted with their very lives. Harold Shipman, known to the British press as Dr. Death, was a beloved family doctor in Greater Manchester, England, and he is believed to be one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history. From the 1970s through the 1990s, Shipman murdered his patients. Almost all of them were elderly women who lived alone and trusted him completely. His method was quiet, clinical, and nearly undetectable. He would visit them at their homes, administer a lethal dose of diamorphine, medical-grade heroin, and then simply falsify their medical records to say they died of natural causes. Since his victims were elderly, no one suspected a thing for decades. He was a pillar of the community, a kind, caring doctor. He was finally caught in 1998 after a foolish act of greed. He forged the will of one of his last victims to make himself the beneficiary. He was convicted in 2000 for 15 murders, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. A massive public inquiry later concluded that he was responsible for at least 215 murders, with the total likely being around 250. Shipman never confessed and took his own life in prison in 2004. His victim count dwarfs almost every household name killer, a terrifying testament to the evil that can hide behind a trusted face. Number 2, Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes. At number 2 is a man whose alleged crimes are on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. His name is Pedro Lopez, and he is known as the monster of the Andes. This Colombian serial killer went on a rampage across South America in the 1970s, leaving a trail of death that spanned Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. Lopez targeted young girls, often from poor indigenous communities. He would lure them with small gifts or promises of work before abducting, assaulting, and strangling them. His reign of terror finally ended in 1980 when an attempted abduction went wrong and he was arrested. What he told investigators was beyond horrifying. He confessed to murdering over 300 girls. And while confessions can be unreliable, Lopez led police to a mass grave in Ecuador, where they unearthed the bodies of 53 of his victims. Based on this, he was convicted for 110 murders in Ecuador. But here is the most disturbing part of his story. He was released in 1998 after serving a relatively short sentence. He was then deported to Colombia, briefly placed in a psychiatric hospital, and then, in 1999, he was released and vanished. That's right. A man convicted of over 100 murders and who claimed to have killed 300 was simply let go. As of today, his whereabouts are unknown. A monster simply gone. Number 1, Samuel Little. And finally, at number 1, we have the man the FBI has confirmed as the most prolific serial killer in American history. His name is Samuel Little, and for nearly half a century he got away with murder. From 1970 to 2005, Little drifted across the country, preying on the marginalized, sex workers, drug users, and transient women he believed society would neither look for nor miss. His method was brutal, but often left little evidence. He would knock his victim unconscious, assault her, and then strangle her, dumping her body where it often wouldn't be found for years. Many of his victims' deaths were misclassified as overdoses or accidents, allowing Little to continue his killing spree completely under the radar. He was finally caught and convicted for 3 murders in 2014 thanks to DNA evidence. In prison with nothing left to lose, he started talking. He confessed to 93 murders. To help prove his claims, he provided detailed, haunting drawings of his victims, sketched entirely from memory. The FBI, working with law enforcement across the country, has been able to credibly verify his involvement in at least 60 murders. Little died in prison in 2020, but the work to identify his many victims continues. He is the deadliest killer on our list, and the ultimate proof that the most horrifying monsters are often the ones we never even see. Conclusion. From the brazen taunts of the Freeway Phantom to the quiet evil of Dr. Death and the staggering confessions of Samuel Little, these 10 stories reveal a chilling truth. The serial killers who dominate pop culture are just a fraction of the real-life monsters who have walked among us. The deadliest predators in history often succeeded, not because they were brilliant, but because they targeted those living on the fringes of society. The poor, the addicted, the forgotten. Their stories were ignored, and their victims went uncounted. It makes you wonder how many other ghosts are out there, with victim counts we can't even begin to fathom. Which of these cases shocked you the most? Did you know about any of them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video informative and want more deep dives into the darker side of history, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, stay aware and stay safe.